Tracey, I love your book, Man-Made, How the Bias of the Past is Being Built into the Future. You came up with the idea in 2016. Tell us about that.
Yes, my then 11-year-old son turned to me one morning over breakfast and said, "Mum, I want a robot slave." I said, "Darling, what are you talking about?" In a moment of appalling parenting, my husband and I had allowed him to watch South Park, the adult cartoon series, early in the morning so we could get a sleep in. In this one episode, Cartman, a very naughty boy, was ordering around his Amazon Alexa like he was some kind of colonial master. And as a lifelong journalist and feminist, I had an epiphany that this idea about women and girls being servile in the home from the 1950s was being built into the chatbots that will run our futures. Because if you look in the business and finance sector, overwhelmingly the chatbots have male voices because historically we've read that as being credible and having gravitas.
And so as someone who's really worked to ensure that there is diversity and that there's not biases out there, the idea of unconscious bias being embedded into our future sort of it unknits everything, all this hard work that you and other campaigners like you have done. How does that make you feel?
It's frightening, and that's why I call it frontier feminism, because if you look at the waves of social change in any kind of civil rights movement, we keep bringing it forward. We might go 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but we're still going in the right direction. Because of this structural bias, we actually risk for the first time in history going backwards. And that's because the embedding of bias is a 3-step process. In layperson's terms, it starts with the data, the big pile of images and videos and words on the internet. Inevitably, that's historical. A lot of the dirty old data sets are from the 1980s and 90s, where every doctor is a male and every nurse is a female, effectively. Then there's the next step of the creation of the algorithm. People think of algorithms as a mathematical equation, but 2 people I interviewed for Man-Made said, no, an algorithm is an opinion written in code, and the programmer's unconscious bias goes into that. The 3rd step is machine learning, which I characterise as a white supremacist going down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theory websites, because the machines, often unsupervised, take the bias of the first 2 steps and deepen it.
And it is very scary because, it's very hard to correct unconscious bias. Once it's there, people don't know the difference between what's true, what's not. And now we have deepfakes. Do you want to explain what deepfakes are?
With deepfake technology these days, you can get an app that costs next to nothing or even free and take someone's head or body off the internet and put them into a completely conflated circumstance. We've seen that with politicians like Barack Obama and Donald Trump. They were the first big examples. Their faces and bodies being made to say and do things they never said or did, and people can't tell the difference. But a fascinating fact that I found while researching my book is that 95% of deepfakes are of pornography. So every time you put a photo, or your daughter or son puts a photo online, they risk having it scraped and having a deep fake pornographic video made of it that looks so real, even experts find it difficult to tell the difference.
I know it's scary. There's the original JPEG was a Swedish model called Lena, and there's a documentary that's come out called Losing Lena, and it's probably the most widely used photograph in the world. It's a picture of her in the 70s, a Playboy cover that an engineer put up for a JPEG. And she's now in her 60s or 70s, but that photograph is being used everywhere. So, women lose control of their identity in this sort of, this area. It's quite scary.
The women who've experienced this describe it as a violation. They say, yes, it's not my physical body that's been violated, but seeing those horrific videos with their heads on it or their bodies on it in circumstances that they never engaged in, it's effectively a breach of consent. And it comes under the umbrella of tech-facilitated abuse or coercive control, which is going through the roof because we're living in the middle of the 4th Industrial Revolution. And as we've seen in revolutions previously, the pace of technology advances before legislation and regulation keep up.
And we were on a panel together at South by Southwest Sydney, which was unconscious bias, And can we learn from the past mistakes, or are we doomed? What's your thoughts on that? Are we doomed?
I know a lot of tech giants are saying we are doomed. Geoffrey Hinton came out, the so-called godfather of AI, and said this is an existential risk. It could end humanity. Technically, he is correct, particularly with unsupervised machine learning and with the use of robot drones in war zones. We could easily lose control of this technology. But my concern is more about almost the micro biases and discrimination that's embedded in the technology we use every day, widening the gap between rich and poor around the world, and further disenfranchising people in the global south who are being paid next to nothing in Kenya to go through horrific images online to label them for machine learning, and all the capital going to places like Silicon Valley in the hands of very few, usually white male billionaires. I also try not to have this dichotomous idea of utopia or dystopia, because in every other technological revolution or industrial revolution, we come to a middle place. And that middle place, I've got a word for it now, it's great, is protopia, a word that the co-founder of Wired magazine came up with in 2006 to describe advancing incrementally a future that's good for humanity, using technology as a tool rather than letting it master us. So I'm all for protopia now.
Yeah, go protopia. But what is the utopia and what is the dystopia? Let's just dig into that a bit deeper.
Yeah, a couple of chapters in my book, I looked into previous writers like Thomas More, who wrote the famous book Utopia, that's studied in schools to this day. A lot of utopian thought from years ago focused on the concept that technology would free us up from work and we'd live in these beautiful green bucolic fields with all this leisure time and, you know, take away the burden of the workplace. Well, we know with technological advances that hasn't happened. With the advent of email, yes, we could work more from home, but our work hours expanded. So utopia is very good in theory, but none of the utopian ideas have ever worked because of what's called the theory of the gimmick. We have labour-saving devices in our homes. Do all of them save our labour? Well, some of them do, right? Some of them are great, some of the replication of what we've seen on the Jetsons, but we fill the available time we have left with more work. That is what we do as humans. Dystopia certainly looks like the end of humanity, and look, it could end overnight with the exponential advance of machine learning and particularly generative AI. But with our view of utopia, we can bring that to protopia, which is a little bit more realistic.
But the general intelligence of some of the AI structures out there is higher than any human being already.
Well, this is the conversation that's happening around ChatGPT, isn't it?
Yeah.
They have, according to the reportage around it, discovered an algorithm that can do very complex mathematical equations. And there was a split on the board between people who thought that was unsafe and could lead to the end of humanity, and people who thought, well, hang on, we're in an AI arms race at the moment. If we don't work with this and put it out as products and devices and innovations in this time of late-stage capitalism, someone else will. And that reflects the history of ChatGPT, which came out in the beta stage when it simply wasn't ready and sparked a competitive frenzy, which is leading all of us to talking about artificial intelligence in this day and age, something I didn't see 7 years ago.
No, you're ahead of your time.
No, I didn't see this coming. What we're seeing at the moment, though, replicates history, where when the ChatGPT or the OpenAI board split, they got rid of the women who have historically been the ones, that's right, belling the cat on issues to do with safety and ethics and bias, and got some more blokes in who undoubtedly just wanted to use it to make more money.
And so when Sam Altman went back, you know, it was surprising to a lot of us that the board, the new board, didn't have any women. I mean, that doesn't give us much confidence going forward, really.
It's surprising in a way, but also not when you look at the composition of OpenAI's workforce. It's 75% male. So all of those letters that they sent out saying we want Sam back, you've got to look at the gender split, the race split, to see where these decisions are coming from. One of my favourite parts about writing this book was researching the history of computing, which is full of women and people of colour.
Go Ada Lovelace.
Go Ada Lovelace, the world's first computer
Hedy Lamarr.
programmer. Hedy Lamarr came up with the technology that we know is behind Bluetooth and GPS now.
Yeah, pretty extraordinary.
Extraordinary. Maryam al-Astrolabi, 10th century AD in Aleppo, Syria, creating astrolabes, computers that read the stars. But the thing that really landed deeply with me was the fact that there were more women in computing in the 1950s than men post-war. And then when the money came into the sector, the women were forced out and the men took over, which brings us up to today. And in the vernacular is the IT guy, not the IT gal.
And how do we get more women in STEM generally? Because the difference of women to men in tech is generally sort of 23% women to men. Given that there's a tech shortage of people, that doesn't sound right.
Like anything, there's not one solution. And look, I commend you with the work on Women Love Tech, because you are doing game-changing work, breaking down those structures, elevating role models so other people can follow, because you can't be what you can't see. To my mind, oh, you're amazing. To my mind, the problem starts in that time when kids are in primary school. Because I start with an anecdote in my book about my daughter and son, mixed gender school, going to a laboratory for a chemistry experiment, and the boys elbowing the girls out of the road for the scarce lab equipment that they need in order to get their marks. So it starts from a very young age, and this whole old-fashioned piece of neurosexism that girls are no good at maths, and that carries all the way through school. So we need to break down that harmful and incorrect stereotype. And then it's embedded when women go into the technology workplace and face barriers when it comes to the gender pay gap, leadership opportunities, sexual harassment and assault. So many go in and then they're forced out. So it's not just one blockage. This pipeline is really blocked up.
And was that one of the things that surprised you most when you wrote Man-Made, is some of the inequities to women that are out there and how they're being embedded?
And also the fact that it didn't make logical sense. For example, I tell the story about a Nigerian tech worker going into a Marriott hotel and trying to use an AI light sensor powered soap dispenser. It doesn't work for his hands, but it works for his white colleagues' hands and a white piece of paper. Now that happened because we think about big tech as big, and certainly their profit margins are larger than the GDPs of nation states, but every group making innovations is small, 3 to 4 people. And they test it on themselves and their friends, right? This homogenised group usually. Yet we know if you create innovation with inclusive design and testing, you will sell more product, it'll be accessible to more people, and it's better for humanity. So I guess what shocked me wasn't so much the blockages, but how much more money they could make by having inclusive design and testing, and how much it would be better for society as a whole.
Yeah, totally nonsensical and very, very alarming when you hear stories like that. Can we trust the big tech companies to do the right thing? Given that we are in an arms race out there, and the scramble to get Bard and everything else that came out after ChatGPT was fast and furious, wasn't it?
In a word, no. We're living at that time in history between the advent of the car and the development of the seatbelt. It is very, very dangerous. We need governments to come in and regulate and legislate while still keeping an eye on innovation. You don't want to completely crush the industry. But unfortunately, because a lot of this is led by the US and they're beholden to the free market, they've got an election next year, I really don't see any kind of strict measures being put in place. If you look to Europe though, they've got a wonderful AI Act that's still in its draft form. That's excellent. It's got a traffic light safety system. Red, don't go near that AI development. Yellow, use with caution. So there's a lot of sensible ideas out there. I know in Australia we'll have some regulations very shortly. It has to be balanced with these companies making money, but we can't just rely upon them to self-regulate. It's like saying to big tobacco, self-regulate. We know it didn't work.
it doesn't work. I mean, Australia's actually at the forefront of some of those changes with what Dr. Katrina Wallace is doing with the Metaverse Alliance. But there's still a long way to go with actually, I've spoken to various politicians and they don't actually understand a lot of the tech. That's part of the problem and what the implications and impacts are.
If you're looking at big structural solutions, we actually need more young people in politics and parliament. We need more diversity in the world's governments because there's more diversity of thinking. And as a society, as consumers and members of civil society, we need to put pressure on our politicians to make change so they put it to the top of the agenda instead of the bottom. You know, the great former Human Rights Commissioner Ed Santow did that fantastic 3-year report on AI safety, and it's kind of gone nowhere. He called for the world's first AI safety commissioner. We've got the world's first e-safety commissioner here in Australia. That could be part of her remit. So there are solutions there, but we need to, I suppose, exaggerate, or not exaggerate, but emphasise the urgency of this matter.
Yeah, and the existential risks are real. I mean, they are very concerning. Let's talk about the military intelligence, which you wrote about in your book.
Or military lack of intelligence.
Yes.
This was actually from research done by Dr. Katrina Wallace, who found that, you know, if you've got algorithms that differentiate or discriminate against different groups or classes of people, say there's machine learning when you've got robot drones or killer robots, as the headline read when they wrote about this in the States, they could very well decide that women and children are of less value to society compared with men, and they could follow them and kill them because of that discrimination that's embedded within those systems. Also, with facial recognition technology not working as well with people of colour or people who are wearing head coverings, if it's a search and rescue mission that artificial intelligence is involved in, they might leave women and children behind in certain countries in the world. So this is really multifaceted. We love watching Spot the Dog and the dancing parkour robots from Boston Dynamics, but there's a huge problem there. They make most of their money out of warfare. And in a way, that's inculcated the population into thinking that these technological advances are okay before we have safety measures in place in a war zone of all things.
Yeah. It is concerning, the future of AI and the existential risk. What would you say to people in terms of being equipped to deal with it? And should they be putting pressure on governments to make sure that it's regulated? What can the individual do?
I would say to people, you have more power than you realise. Every great global movement, from the women's movement, the civil rights movement, has been led by grassroots of people getting together around the world, first with consciousness raising, becoming aware that this is a problem, secondly with education, and thirdly with activation. That starts in the home, talking to your kids, talking to your friends, talking to your community, changing the voice of Siri to a male voice, catching a Sheba or a taxi instead of an Uber to try to break the stranglehold of big tech. It then goes to the workplace. Ask your bosses or your colleagues, where do we use AI in our workplace? Do we do audits of the data and of the algorithms? You know, how can we increase diversity and inclusion and, importantly, belonging in the workplace? And then the next step is to contact our leaders, whether they're business leaders or government leaders, and say, we're not happy about this and it's your job to do something about it for the sake of humanity.
I talked to the Teals at an event that was held by BNT last year. All the Teals, the new Teals were there, and I asked what they were doing about unconscious bias and AI, and they basically said, we're not across it yet, you know. So, but you do have to speak out, and they said it was a good thing to ask because they knew they did need to be across it. So we can all do something, I think. Dame Quentin Bryce commented about your book, which I loved reading, that it's the perfect book to sort of really grapple, you know, it grapples with all the issues and impacts that presents itself with AI. And I think we really do need to be across it. And you really do get all those points across. So thank you, Tracey, for the work that you've done on the book. It's I know it was nominated for another Walkley Award. You've already won two. But it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for all of your work and for the lovely chat, Robyn.
Thank you.